In this part of our instructional video, we'll go over the aorist forms for liquid verbs. Remember that a liquid verb is a verb whose stem ends with a liquid letter. It ends in either a lambda, a rho, a mu, or a nu. So lambda, rho, mu, nu are liquid letters, and if the stem of a verb ends with a liquid letter, then it's called a liquid verb. And liquid verbs have a special form for the aorist active indicative and aorist middle indicative, and we'll go over that in just one moment. We're going to be using the word krino, which means I judge, as our paradigmatic liquid verb. So I judge, or I am judging. And it looks very similar to what we would see with luo, except the tense formative is different. So how would I say I judged? How would I form the first person singular form for krino in the aorist tense? I would add the augment, I would take the verbal root, and it just so happens that krino is one of those rare liquid verbs where the lexical form and the verbal root are the same. Actually, it's not the case that they're the same for most liquid verbs. Most liquid verbs have a different verbal root, and we'll be going over that in a minute. But let's go over an easy example, krino, where the lexical form and the verbal root are the same. So the verbal root here is krin, and notice the tense formative. The tense formatives will look just like luo, but instead of sa, sas, se, or sen, same, sate, san, all the sigmas have been dropped. And instead, the tense formatives plus the secondary active suffixes is a, as, e, or en, ame, ate, an, without the sigmas. And the reason why this took place is that to say, for example, a krinsa with a sigma, that's actually really hard for a native Greek speaker. They don't like the fact that you have to say a krin and you have to pause, sa, you kind of catch your breath, a krin sa. They don't like having to pause when they say a word. So over time, the sigma drops, and if you just say krina, that's much easier to say. Just listen to it, a krin sa, a krina, a krin sa, a krina. A krina is much easier to say. And so over time, the dropping of the sigma became grammaticalized, and that's why you have a different way to form the aorist active indicative for liquid verbs, but it's very similar to regular verbs like luo. So if I want to say I judged, I take the augment, I add the verbal root, and instead of sa, I add a, and a krina is I judged. You judged is a krinas. He, she, it judged is a krin ne or nen. We judged is a krinamen. You all judged is a krinnate. And they judged is a krinnon. So say this with me. Ready? 1, 2, 3. A krina, a krinas, a krine, a krinamen, a krinate, a krinon. And for the first middle indicative form, let's use a deponent verb. So apokrinamai means I answer. I'm answering. And notice that this is a compound verb. So whatever our augment is, it's going to go between the preposition and the main part of the verb stem. And so what I've done already here is I put the augment in. So notice that the omicron drops. The augment is inserted between the preposition and the main verb stem. And so to say I answered, because this is a deponent verb, so I'm not translating in a middle way. I'm translating this middle voice form as a deponent. I think using a middle deponent verb is good practice for us to remind us that most verbs in the New Testament that use the middle voice are in fact deponent verbs. To say I answered, it's a, pe, kre, na, main. So again, the only difference between luo and a liquid verb like crino is that the sigmas have been dropped and the tense formative uses just the alpha and not the sigma alpha. So crinomain is I answered. Ape cri nasa would be the intermediate form, but remember the sigma likes dropping when it's sandwiched between two vowels. The big five, little two rules say that alpha and omicron combine to form an omega. And the final form will look like this. Ape crino. To say she, he, or it answered, ape crinata. We answered, ape crinometha. You all answered, ape crinaste. And they answered, ape crinanta. So let's say these forms together. These are the aorist middle forms for liquid verbs. Ape crinomain, ape crino, ape crinata, ape crinometha, ape crinaste, ape crinanta. Now, if all liquid verbs were like crino, life would be very easy. But unfortunately, they're not. Crino is an exception where the aorist stem undergoes no modification. So when we think about liquid verbs, we should always think that there's two slight changes from the luo paradigm that we always have to remember for liquid verbs. One is that instead of sa, it uses the alpha only as a tense formative. And then the second thing is that sometimes the stem for the aorist tense undergoes a slight change. And this slight change is something you would memorize as part of your vocabulary as you learn not just the lexical form of the verb or the verbal root, but you'll remember the first person singular forms for all the tenses for every verb that you learn. Moving forward, what happens then for most liquid verbs is two tweaks, not one. You have the alpha tense formative, and you have a stem change with the verbal root. And a lot of times that stem change is the insertion of one letter, often an iota. And the reason why that happens is, again, phonetic. Over time, words want to sound or be pronounced in an easier way, and therefore we get phonetic changes in the pronunciation, and then that change gets grammaticalized, and then it becomes part of our grammar. So one example of this is when we see the contraction isn't. Many people say ain't, and even though there is a handful of people in the world that still don't want to put ain't in our Webster dictionary, I think officially it made it. That enough people said ain't and not isn't, that over time even ain't got added to our Webster dictionary, although it's identified as a slang use. And so in the same way, because of pronunciation, ain't is simply easier to say than isn't. We have some changes in the stem for aorist liquid verbs. So let's take, for example, meno. Meno is, and its verbal root is men, but notice here, it undergoes a change, and it wants to insert a iota into the verbal root stem, so that when we say, meno means I remain. So if I want to say I remained, I would add the augment, and I would add this modified stem right here, and then the aorist tense formative alpha, and amena is I remained. Notice that for iro, I take up, it is one of those liquid verbs where it uses the verbal root without modification. Crino is like this as well. Crino does not modify its verbal root for the aorist active indicative forms. And so if I augment that, and then I add the alpha tense formative, ira is I took up, or I raised up. What about apokteno, which is I kill? Its verbal root is apokten, but it also wants to add that iota into the stem, and so therefore here is my preposition, my augment, my modified stem, and now the alpha. And apoktena is killed, I killed. If I want to say I sent, here's my verbal root. It also wants to be modified and add that iota. So write down the preposition, add the augment between the preposition and the stem, and then here's my modified stem. And apostela is I sent. Apostela, I sent. And then agero, which is I am raising up. Ager is the verbal root. It also adds an iota into the stem. And so put the augment onto the stem, use the modified root with the iota, add the alpha tense formative, and agera is I raised up. So amena is I remained, era is I took up, apektena is I killed, apestela I sent, and agera I raised up. And if I wanted to form the middle tenses, I would again add the augment, use the modified stem, but instead of the active suffixes, I would use the middle suffix. Amena main is I myself remained. Ramain is I myself took up or raised. Apektenamain is I myself killed. So I'm translating this all in a middle intensive way. Apestelamein is I myself sent, and ageramein is I myself raised. And so remember, with liquid verbs, there are always two changes you have to be concerned about. The first is the sa tense formative changes to just the alpha, and then depending on your vocabulary word, some of the stems, many of the stems will undergo slight modification, and there are a few liquid verbs that don't change at all. And how do I know which stems change, which don't? You memorize it as part of your vocabulary.